Hello and welcome. We are delighted to have you for the Decent Work and Brighter Futures talk series here at the Grad Institute. This is a four-part global discussion hosted by Youth Foresight in collaboration with Thinking Ahead on Societal Change Platform, TASC for short, as we call it here. This is a celebration of the 20th anniversary of the ILO's Global Employment Trend for Youth Trend Report. So this whole talk series has been created so we can actually bring all of these regional insights and actually have conversations with the people we're talking about to see if we got it right, as Sara would say. So that is why we're here. So we're taking a Gen Z, so age 25 to 29, and a Gen X, someone who entered the job force in the early 2000s. So we're going to discuss their experience transitioning into the labor market, and this is my lovely panel of speakers. But before that, I will introduce myself. My name is Joanita Kalibala. I am the Events and Communications Manager at TASC Platform, and I am going to be your host for this interactive discussion today. So I hope everyone online is able to hear us. We have a fabulous tech team who is also there to support you and who will be helping moderate online from the Q&As to chat, and we will also be using Menti. So just to give you a little bit of the previous discussions, there have been two other episodes. One was hosted in October, and it was focused on Asia, and then the second one was focused on Africa. Now we turn to Europe. This is now our focus being in Geneva. That's quite something that was a little bit easier for us to get in the room. And we're going to be looking at what are the insights that were found in the report on that. And then after that, we'll get to talking to our lovely representatives of this Gen X and Gen Z voices. As I said to everyone in the room, we're using these microphones so everyone online can hear us, but not for amplification, so we're still speaking out. And so when we have the Q&As for everyone, we will be passing around this mic so people online can also hear you. And now it's my time to welcome the people online. Thank you so much. There are many of you there waiting, eager with questions and ways to interact with you. We have a plethora of ways that you can engage with us. We have Mentimeter, we're going to have the Zoom chat, and we're also going to have the Q&A box. So please submit any questions that you will have for the speaker for later on in the session in the Q&A box. And so we'll be able to create a whole list that we will then raise at that time. And I just want to say thank you to all the tech support, ILO, Youth Foresight, hosting and helping to prepare everything from designs that are beautiful, and from all the team that support us who make this possible, and for my boss for listening to me ramble on about my notes. Thanks, Katrona. If we can now just show the QR code that we'll be using for Menti, please, if everyone in the room and as well as online, please go ahead and scan this with another device if you have your phone, or even use the link that is going to be shared in the chat. You can also use it by typing in menti.com, code 39402737. Perfect. So I'm just looking in the room if enough people have scanned the QR codes, because then we can start with our first engagement time. Oh, yes, I see thumbs up. Thank you very much, people online. Fantastic. We see you coming in. That's fabulous. So everyone, so let's go to the next slide, which is our first Mentimeter, because we wanted to get a sense of who is in the room. It's important for us to know the kind of mix of generations. So Gabriele, please go on to the next. Perfect. So if you can go ahead and respond to this one. And so we know what the distribution is. Okay. Come on, Gen Z. So wonderful. So thank you everyone for logging in and responding. I would like to now hand over the stage to Sara Elder, who hosted the first two episodes of the talk series. Sara is head of Employment Analysis and Economic Policy Unit and Employment Policy Department at ILO. She will be setting the scene for us with a presentation of regional youth employment trends. Over to you, Sara.
Thank you. This is okay.
Yes.
I'm okay here. All right, let's get the boring part over with. I am Sara Elder, a senior economist at the ILO in Geneva and principal author of the Global Employment Trends for Youth. Yes, so this is a report that the ILO has been putting out for 20 years now. So we started the first Global Employment Trends for Youth in 2004. So we were getting a lot of mileage out of this. We get a lot of information from statistics, and then we do the storytelling to talk about what youth employment looks like. But sometimes we miss a little bit of the human voice, and we want to hear from young people to let us know if what we're going to talk about resonates with you. Are we getting the trends right? Are we getting the stories right? So that's what we're going to do in short today, in a moment. And yeah, then Joanita will walk us through the dialogue. So because this is a 20-year report, we focus on the trends, but we also focus on a bit of the longer term story because we want to see what's changed over the previous 20 years. And that's why we have a Gen X speaking with the Gen Z today, so they can compare storylines, similarly to what we do in the report itself. I will be focusing on the region of Europe and Central Asia, since that is where we are. Okay, so the first question that we ask ourselves with this report is, are we done? Is this COVID-19 storyline that we keep harping on about, is it behind us? And the answer is yes. Fortunately, we can say that all of that pain that we felt, especially if you were trying to enter the labor market in the COVID peak, this is now behind us. And we have a global youth unemployment rate of 12.8%, which means nothing to you until I give you some context. This is lower than it was prior to the COVID crisis. And even beyond that, this is a 15-year low in the global youth unemployment rate. So something is looking pretty positive on the youth unemployment rate alone. If you're looking for work, it's supposed to be easier. Now, this storyline does not fit everywhere because there are certain regions where the youth unemployment rate has continued to rise. These regions are East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Arab states. Europe is a bit like the global storyline. In Europe, the youth unemployment rate, it's 13.5%, if I'm getting that. It is also at a demonstratively low level. Good news for Europe, maybe. You guys will tell me if it feels good for you. Next slide, please. All right, so there's a great deal of disaggregation across the world, but also within the Europe region. So we talk about Europe and Central Asia. Here you have the breakdown of the subregions within Europe and Central Asia. And you'll see that where we're doing well in lowering the youth unemployment rate, in lowering the youth NEET rate, in getting young people into work with the employment to population ratio, it's looking particularly positive in Central and Western Asia, also in North, South, and Western Europe. Where it's not looking so good is Eastern Europe. And this is where we're really seeing the full blunt, the context of the war in Ukraine, where unfortunately many young people have moved out. Young people are having one of the lowest youth employment to population ratios of the world. Only 1 in 4 young people in this region is able to work. And that's the story of Russia and Ukraine, no doubt about it. Next, please. So also we have a storyline that I don't like much, which is that in Europe, the youth unemployment rate of young women is higher than the youth unemployment rate of young men. The gap is not huge, and certainly there are other regions in the world where the gap is much wider, for example, in South Asia and in the Arab states. But the fact that young women face an added disadvantage is still a bit worrisome for me. Next slide. All right, so where Europe does do pretty well is with this indicator called Youth Not in Employment, Education, or Training, young NEET. So those who are NEET rates. Globally, we have 1 in 4 young people that are NEETs. In Europe, these indicators is 13. Yeah, there you go, 13. And also we have this is an indicator that's very much gender biased. 2 in 3 young NEETs in the globe across the globe are young women. In Europe, it's about 55%. So anyway, the reason we do so well with the youth NEET rates in Europe is because you have pretty strong educational institutions that do manage to keep young people in school. Okay, there are certainly exceptions. There are certainly the disadvantaged young people, but on the whole, it's doing pretty well. Next, please. Okay, next. As I say, this is a 20-year anniversary edition. We wanted to look at the long-term trends to see what's changed over time. And unfortunately, one of the things that has not changed over time is that we have not seen great progress in rising the number of young people that get into decent jobs. Now, we can tell the decent job story in many ways. In this report, we talk about young people who manage to get a regular paid job. And you'll see there's a great divide across the income levels. If you're in a high income country, around 4 in 5 young people manage to get a regular paid job. If you're in a low income country, the statistic, the share is 1 in 5. So a huge global divide by income. In Europe, yeah, it's around 4 in 5. It's not bad. Please, go ahead. But also not looking so good is this story of the real wage growth. So this is how much money young people are managing to put in their pockets. We look at it's the nominal wage that a young person will receive, adjusted for the cost of living. And you'll see 2 pictures. I said this is a tale of two stories here. In Spain, you have this really odd negative story where the money in the pockets of young people is buying less than it should, less than it did in 2013. So it's only in 2019 that you start to see the real wage of young people increase a bit, always lower than the average real wage of adults. So it shows you the type of jobs that young people do just don't put enough money in their pocket, often forcing them to take up multiple jobs to get by. But on the other hand, you have a story like Poland, where the real wage of young people and adults has skyrocketed. So it would be really interesting to investigate what is the cause of this. But income level of young people is certainly something that weighs heavily on them, especially when they're trying to move out into their own household. Next slide, please. Returns to education. This is also an interesting storyline. So it used to be you'd get a university education, you get a good job, and you're on the road to upwards mobility. So now we're finding that with more and more young people getting a university education, sometimes the demand for these high-skilled workers is not quite matching. So it means that the university educated are competing amongst themselves for the same jobs. Oftentimes it means they have to accept a job for which they're overeducated, which is extremely frustrating for them. If they've done all of the right things, they've followed all of the right courses, the advice of the system, and they still can't find that good job. Next slide, please. All of this leads into a situation where we find that young people are feeling quite anxious today. And we have a statistic that 2 in 3 young people across the globe are worried about losing their job, which can be a little bit contradictory to the youth unemployment rate that we've seen. It's at a low, record low, yet young people are still worried about losing their job. And I think this speaks to the quality of the job that's available to them. If they're having to follow gig after gig, unable to come up with a job that gives them the security to move to that next stage of independent adulthood, then we really have an issue. Also, the story of upward mobility. So only 1 in 2 young people in Europe feel that they are doing better off than their parents' generation, which I think is not a very nice story. And next, I think that is the end of our story, giving you a lot of food for thought, and I now hand it over to Juanita to work us through the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you for this presentation. And I'm sure some of you are curious to go grab your hands on that report. We have QR codes at the back for anyone to scan it and to get inside. And Gabriele will also be sharing that report online so everyone can have access to it. I would like to now introduce our speakers for this intergenerational discussion. Representing Gen X, we have Mia Seppo, Assistant Director General for the Jobs and Social Protection Cluster at the International Labour Organization. Thank you for being here. Yeah. Wonderful. I'll just remind everyone to use the mic in a second, just so we know, and representing Gen Z, we have Davide Fanciulli. See?
Yeah.
Fanciulli?
Yeah.
Fanciulli, Assistant Program Management Officer at Beyond Lab. Thank you. And Michelle, also representing Gen Z, Michelle Olguin, Project Coordinator at Albert Hirschman Center here on Democracy here at the Grand Institute. And not exactly, not far. Because I was very concerned about having another panel that we've seen again and just them getting a little bit more stiffer in the conversation, I decided that we're going to have a very kind of game-like icebreaker. And they're not the only ones going to participate. The speakers have here flip charts that they will be answering. We're going to do a word association game. Online, you will also be able to do the same thing with the same Mentimeter that we have, and we'll bring it up in a second. And I'm going to be giving you words, and in 15 seconds, you need to put down the first word that comes up to your mind. So it's that you hear this word, this is the first one. And what we'll do, the speakers will write down their answers. And Michelle's already looking at some of the things. And basically we'll see if the speakers and our online audience and in the room match in terms of their association with these different words. We're ready for the first one. Okay, now let's make sure to hide. 15 seconds, let's go. Answers are coming in. 5 seconds. And okay, so now I want the speakers to first show what they've put in. Let's go ahead and see. Oh, family means love. That's beautiful, kids. Safe space. I love it. That's beautiful. Now, Gabrielle, reveal our answers. Ooh, okay. So look at this. So we have love, support, trust. Yes. So, okay, wonderful. Out of all this, okay, children's there again. So I see a lot of links. So we're all in the same kind of feel for what family means. Okay, moving on to the next one. Gen X. Okay. Write it. Gen X, what does that mean to you? First word. Pop it in there. Put it in. But whatever it means to you. 5 seconds.
I need more time.
Okay, fine. I'm giving the speakers 10 extra seconds. Okay, wonderful. Okay, I can't wait to see what they wrote now. Go ahead, Michelle.
I wrote undefined.
Okay. Books.
Not social media.
Parents. Lovely.
Maybe I was biased with the family question before.
Okay, let's see what the audience said. Oh, I feel like old is a big one. That's a bit harsh, but okay. Disoriented. Oh my goodness. Leaders. We have a few leaders. Hardworking, stable. None. Don't reason. Ooh, interesting. Traditional. These are very strong. Okay, very strong responses. I like it. I like it. Okay, next word for association. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's money. Go for it. 5 seconds. Okay. Letting people finish up. Oh, someone needs a little bit more. Okay. Interesting.
Someone sang and I am writing ABBA, but I can't. So,
Go ahead, I guess. Okay. Perfect. Turn around the speakers. Okay.
Rent.
Rent. Okay, that's rent. Oh, okay. Rent, share.
ABBA.
ABBA. Understand. Let's see what the audience said. Wealth, motivation, inflation, necessary. Okay. Health, opportunities, power. Bitcoins, you like that one? Someone said rent with you. That's fantastic.
I'm not the only one who has to pay rent.
So
She's doing online.
I think they're doing both at the same time. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Work-life balance. Are we ready? Go. Okay. Okay, let's see what the speaker said. Myth. Oh, being purpose. Wow, I'm gonna ask questions about this. That's interesting because you both had a different relationship with very different. Let's see what online said. Let's see if which matches. Okay, wow. Also very different responses as opposed to before where we had one of them coming out. This is quite more various. Yes, mental health, impossible, rest, peace. I'm not sure if it's peace. Yeah, hard to achieve. Okay, realism. Oh, interesting. I'm wondering if they're doubting the realism or if they think it's real. Still striving for it. I think that's everyone's in the same boat. Okay, let's look at the next word. Gen Z.
Doubting myself.
I feel like you need to just put the first word and just trust it. Trust that first instinct. Okay. Okay, let's see, speakers. What did you put?
Two
To define online hunger. Ooh,
Wow.
very interesting. Can't wait to tell us how you feel about how the start and transitioning into the workforce went for you. Let's see what the audience said. Okay, again, very divergent right now. Immature, ooh, dynamic, that's the big one, I guess, that people have agreed upon. Phones is there, unstable, social media, digital savvy, social media savvy. Okay, so a lot of technological words, media junkies, to take it to the slang, abstract. That's interesting. I like those. It's interesting that we have this variety of words and different descriptions. Okay. Okay, easy. Oh, addiction's there too. Interesting. Okay, so let's go to the next word. Artificial intelligence. What does artificial intelligence mean to you? The first word.
We should get them qualified.
Okay. Go ahead.
Everything.
Everything. Scary, but possibility. Scary as well. Okay, see? Not so different. Okay. Let's see what the audience said. Ooh, okay, so future productivity helpful. Threat. Okay, so that's it's linking, but quite positive, at least the ones that have popped in. Coworker wild card, yes. Scary also appeared again. Ease, unemployment. Yes, I think that's been a major fear of many. Generational divide. Yes, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, we have two more. Let's go. Let's see the next one. So employer. Thank you. Perfect. Wonderful. Let's see. Ooh, project, boss, and money. Okay. Interesting. You'll explain that later, right? The project.
I am playing my freelancer.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Let's see what they said online. Okay, authority, technology. Ooh, that's interesting. Boss, authority comes in, manager, yes. Exploring talent, scary, unfortunately. Provider, unreliable, goodness Lord, yes. Paycheck, understand that. Hierarchy, necessary evil. Okay. So let's see, let's do our last word association, future. Okay, just writing a book, a word. Okay, let's see what the speakers have to say.
Unknown, but in a good way.
Okay, now, yes, hope. Wonderful. Okay, let's see what you said online. Oh, okay, so hope is reflected, bright, scary, climate change, not free. Interesting. Capitalist, generations, inequality, hopeful, overwhelming, dynamic, vision. Okay, urban. Okay, AI. Perfect. Okay, so perfect. So I hope you all enjoyed that and got us really nice and warm and ready for a very interactive conversation. As I said, we'll be using this mic so people online can hear us. I would like to start off with Mia, our lovely Gen X representative. So I'm going to ask you to now, for our first question, to close your eyes, take a deep breath. Yes, take a deep breath. Imagine yourself in your early 20s, stepping out of university. What did you feel your entrance into the workforce would be like? What kind of jobs, what kind of space? Give us a few highlights from your transition from school to work.
Thanks. So I think it's important to keep in mind that we all graduate in context. There's things we can control, there's a lot that we can't control. So 1990 had the oil shock, 1991, the Soviet Union falls apart. 1995, when I graduated, Finland was in a deep recession. The impact on Finland from the breakup of the Soviet Union was that 30% of foreign trade was gone. So you enter a labor market that looks like that. But I'm actually going to tell you about the story of two Mias. because no generation has a uniform experience where everybody goes through exactly the same, even if they happen to be from more or less the same socioeconomic group and same country, even if they're from the same university. So I graduated from university having been an activist since I was a teenager. I graduated with 2 kids, and I very much built on my previous life as an activist to get into the first real job. My best friend, who's also named Mia, wrote 100 applications. I was unemployed for 6 months before she finally managed to get a job. So these journeys are really different. So I think it's important to keep in mind, no Gen Z or Gen X journey is going to look the same. It happens in a context. We are all part of that context that we grew up in. And the experience is going to differ accordingly.
So how were applications being done at the time? Like, how was she interviewing a lot? Was it just all paper? There's things that have changed since.
I think it's changed a lot. And those days, applications was on paper. You basically wrote it yourself. There was no such thing as AI-generated applications or cover letters. I think much less time was actually spent on cover letters, because today cover letters and really understanding the job that you're applying for and articulating what you bring to the job is so much more important. So I think it really looked quite different. If I would apply for a job now, I would definitely ask Michelle or you, or I will ask my own kids how to do an application, because it is a different word. What is important, I think, to keep in mind is that you really have to know the job you're applying for. You have to understand the job. You have to understand what are the skills, the competencies, what is your potential fit. And you also have to understand, again, context. If you're applying in the country you grew up, it's one thing, the context. If you're applying for international jobs, it's a very different story. And there, obviously, you also have to understand what are you coming with, because we interview very differently. And how we interview is very impacted by where you educate, where you went to school, how you're educated, and the cultural context. I think it's become more even now than it was when I entered the labor market, but there still are differences. And there's obviously lots of jokes and memes about how different nationalities interview, but it's something to be aware of, both when you're doing an interview as yourself, but also when you're interviewing, because you can really get people wrong if you don't understand these cultural differences.
That's very true. I'm gonna turn to Michelle. I want you to react to her experience and tell us how your path has been after, that was not too long ago, not too long ago at all. Just tell us how that went from school to work, and also what's, let's say, distinctly different from Mia's experience.
Yeah, so I actually relate a lot more to Mia's experience than I thought I would, now that you're saying, in the sense of casting a net before you graduate and having a project before you graduate from master's or from bachelor's to actually get a job afterwards. So I had no plan when I started school. I had no plan when I left school either. I was just trying to cast as wide a net as possible, and I figured I would find something that I liked. And I figured that one of them would hire me, and hopefully it would be the same person. So I did chemistry, I did political science, I did international relations here. I wrote for a queer magazine. I worked like interpreting children's rights as like drawings and publishing them online. So I did everything. And the idea was that eventually I would find something, and I did. I actually, one recommendation from a podcast landed me my first job. So that's
how
how it
was your
happened.
application process?
It depends on the job, really. I actually did the very boomer thing of giving a paper CV and arriving to reception and being like, hello, I would like a job, please. Here's my CV. And that's how I got my first job. So it actually does work sometimes. Listen to your parents, guys. So yeah, that's how I got my first job. But then a lot of it was just like talking to people, doing projects with them, doing freelancing for them, and then getting hired. Some of it was like applications online, not a lot of it, honestly, because I don't love those.
Davide, would it differ for you? I'm actually curious to.
Taking the last point on applications, these online applications are so long most of the times, redundant, always asking the same kind of questions, where I think the most frustrating part for me applying, I've mostly applied to the UN world where I'm now working, applying just to then figure out that there is a machine that does a screening, like at first stage.
Yeah.
So you're putting all your humanity, all your passion, all your character and your hunger, right? I spoke about hunger before, because that's what most of us, I don't want to generalize, but have, and then is an AI that allows you at least to pass the first step. So that was that. So a lot of writing, it was really long. And I sent my first applications in April or May 2020 actually. So like plenty of COVID. So the only life is the life of a student that tries to pass exams and things like that. And then there's this thing called COVID. And then I remember I'm a little anecdote. I don't know
Go ahead.
but so I was in China. I was studying in China when COVID happened, and I came back to Milan, where I'm from. And then, as you all know, Milan and the surrounding areas were the hotspot of COVID at the beginning. And after sending different applications, I sent also to a consultancy firm, very famous one that likes my profile. They called me, and they're based in Rome, and they asked me where I'm based. They really like my profile and where I'm based. And as soon as I say Milan, they're like, sorry, COVID, we're very, very scared, right? As if they couldn't think that it would have. But so other than all these redundant long applications, you enter into the job market within the COVID times, dealing with the unexpected. It's just a lot of resilience. This word is a bit of a buzzword now, but that's, I think, what it took us. So that's.
So I'm just gonna lean into into your experience. So now that's how hard it was to get that first job. But what were, let's say, once you started, and speaking as your experience now as a voice for a generation in the UN, and you represent a lot of youth working at the UN, what do you think are the job characteristics that you're looking for? What are the main, let's say, attributes of a job that matter most to you?
I think first one, I would say the word, speaking of words association, I would say safety from two levels. First is financial safety. We need to have, I've done the whole unpaid internship at the UN. I've done the whole very underpaid consultancy. So all of these, unfortunately, it's like that and needs to be changed. So I think an ideal job is really a job that provides safety. First of all, financial safety. And this is related to the accessibility to certain job opportunities, right? But it's also safety when it comes to mental health protection or rights protection or different on like also on a personal level. And it's something that, speaking with my dad and speaking about mental health, it's a taboo, right? So it's really having a job that is aware also of these, and having a boss and having like employers and supervisors that are really aware. So coming from like intergenerational discourse, but also these I have to be very honest. I come from I've done a bachelor in a very traditional business school in Milan, where a lot of my peers would have killed for a job in a big four, and glorified and went along with the glorification of this culture of working in weekends, working until 2 a.m. because we're grinding and no, absolutely not.
Work-life balance team.
Yeah, exactly. So no, when I say, I live in Geneva, I have a good job where at 6:30, I drop the pen and I go, oh my gosh, such a loser. Like we work until 2 a.m. and then we wake up at 8 a.m. What? So I think this is another of saying it has to come both ways, right? So employers, but also our peers. So safety, and then very quickly, because I don't want to take too much time, but I think learning, as I was saying before, we spend all our lives in learning environments where we're just absorbing all information and we want to educate ourselves and we grow, and then we arrive to a job where we're asked to, most of the times, to execute things. And in many jobs, I think the learning curve that was just constant in life just immediately flattens in many jobs. I'm not saying all, because luckily they're not. So I think a job environment which allows this learning curve to keep going and to keep learning. And then the third, last but not least, I think that there has to be space for young people to provide ideas meaningfully. Young people have been and currently are at the basis of so many different movements and ideas and creative. And then they arrive in most jobs where they don't even have I'm not talking about the traditional bring the coffee and photocopy kind of anecdote, but there has to be a balance between giving, but also having a mentor figure that allows you this space to while teaching you things. So
very in line as you said, the importance of that intergenerational dialogue with your bosses. That's what you were talking about, which is quite important. I'm gonna turn to you in the audience to go ahead. We have a question for you, so please go ahead and answer. But while you're doing that, we won't share the results. But what's the most important characteristic of a job that matters to you? Gabriele, you can go ahead and show the next one. I'm gonna turn to Mia. I want to ask you, looking back, do you remember what was the particular characteristic that what was important? Were you seeking just the salary, just let's get that money? What was it for you? Or was it a contract type? Was it the location? What was important?
It's really coming from an activist background. It was really purpose. It was that sense that I wanted to work for the UN because the UN ensures that I'm on the right side of history. I get off the bed on the right side in the morning. Did I do an unpaid internship? Yes, I did. Did I do consultancies? Yes, I did. Was it questioned? Not really. It was assumed. I think it's a really good thing. We are in a better place today in the recognition and in young people speaking up to say, hold on. And I think if you talk about things that are really uneven for helping young people get into the labor market, unpaid internships is one of the worst, because you can only do an unpaid internship if either your parents pay or you have some other financial ways of getting supported. So it really was that sense of purpose. It was that good old fire in your belly kind of thing. Location, I've worked less in Europe than I worked in the other 5 continents where I lived. So location was not really an issue, but I'm happy to speak to the issue of location in hindsight because life teaches you, right? But it was really I joined a part of the UN which is rotational, going and serving in hardship duty station, kids, family or no family, it didn't matter. It was again expected and assumed. And I did that. And again, in hindsight, at a pretty high cost. But that's how it worked, right? That's how things rolled. I think the issue of contract security and financial safety is probably something that has grown in importance because of the cost of living crisis, and also because precarious contracts, as Sara was saying, talking about youth employment trends, have become even more common in terms of young people entering the labor market. So it is a real concern and something that has to be taken into account. But I think we are unlearning too quickly what we learned during COVID. But I hope that there's 2 things that we remember as colleagues, as employers, as people who look at the labor market, look at places of work. And one is, and you mentioned it, Davide, one is just the importance of mental health and resilience, and how do you create a work environment which is not toxic and that allows for a healthy space of work. And the second thing is flexible work arrangements. I firmly believe that flexible work arrangements is here to stay. I wish it had come earlier, because in the past, these rules existed for the UN, but the little bit of the unwritten rule was not to use them. And then everybody started using them during COVID, and now it's, So now I think these are the 2 things that I hope we don't unlearn from COVID, and that those who push people to be back in the office and push to have less flexibility, that those are not going to have the day. We need to maintain this higher awareness of the importance of the working environment and mental health, and the importance of flexible work arrangements.
Absolutely. It's something that we are continuously working on, making a place that is better for all of us. I want to see what the audience has said. So let's see, Gabriele, can you show us the results so far, responses? Okay, so career growth is a huge priority. Interesting work? Yes, absolutely. No one wants to do a job that's not stimulating. Support to a social cause, as you said, the UN traction, those are both like quite important. And a good wage. So a good wage is not so high. More responsibilities are coming in, but it really is about, let's say, what am I doing this for? What is the purpose of that? And that's so important. And I think also maybe linking to what you said before, about this concern of the fear and stress that you've been seeing in the report, Sarah. As you said, like young people are really nervous about that because that's so important, right? It's not just a job to pay bills. Like I need to be passionate, I need to be focused. And so maybe that's also maybe linking to this anxiety. If we look at the distribution, it's it's not too bad even. I think the people who are, let's say, the Gen Xers are looking more about interesting work. That's the big focus. But if not, it's actually quite even in terms of what's important overall. So there's not that much of a difference. That still remains the same. Those are still things, as you said, that we've always wanted and we wish were here before. Fantastic. We're going to have a next question that's going to pop up and people can answer that one while we continue our conversation and we'll get back to your response. But Michelle, I think like you have a very interesting, let's say, freelance experience. And as we've said, like between all these small contracts and having to work for free, I think that's something that people are really curious to understand because people don't have parents to pay all the bills and to have a place to live. Sometimes they have to be doing other things. So freelance actually might be a bit option. So could you tell us about your experience, the opportunities that you had during that, and also specifically in the European context, how that's been?
Sure. Right. Yeah. So yeah, in terms of freelancing, I think there was like two kind of paths that I could see while I was doing my master's here. I did my master's here at the Graduate Institute in case it wasn't clear before. There was two paths, and one was to do the unpaid or the underpaid internships, which was just not an option for me. Like my parents weren't paying my rent or anything like that. So I was like, I have to make rent at the end of the month. I have to make 1,000 francs a month so I can pay where I live. And that was the most important thing. And so, yes, wage, I think it's a huge factor. Obviously, I could have also gotten a part-time job at the grocery store or something like that. That wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to also advance my career at the same time and try to get into these NGOs or these organizations that I aspired to work with. I think freelancing was the only option that was available to me because you couldn't be underpaid, and at least freelancing, provided that you get hired, which is the big part, you get to set the rate that you're going to work for. So that was the only option for me. I enjoyed it a lot. Honestly, I think there's a lot of good parts of freelancing. That is, you get a lot of freedom. You can get less workload when you're feeling tired or you don't want to do as much. And you can increase your workload if you have a big expense, if you have anything that you want to invest towards. At the same time, obviously, there's downsides to freelancing, which is what we talked about, the grind, not knowing how many clients you're going to get the next month, that kind of thing. That's obviously stressful, but I think it's on the same level as somebody who's on a monthly contract, right? And we don't see it as freelancing, but we're all in the same field. So if your contract is related to a project that's like for 6 months, I think it's the same. And I think that's what keeps us, in terms of what happens with young people who do this, it's what keeps us from making like big decisions. And I don't mean like big decisions, like I don't mean like getting married or having children. That's like, nobody's doing that anyway. But like just getting like a couch. Like I had a friend who was in Geneva for 4 years and never got a couch because her contract was 3 months by 3 months. So every time it got renewed, she was like, I'm gonna be in Geneva for 3 more months. Why would I get a couch? And thankfully she changed jobs afterwards and got like a yearly contract and got a couch. So that was great. But it's crazy that we're like 27 and we don't have a couch. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think that impacts a lot on the decisions that you take as a young person.
And I think that's also like a kind of misconception that people might have about Europe and how it compared to other regions, because we've had different regional discussions about what young people are able to do. It's the same thing. The same, I can't even do some basic like comfort. At my beginning, I'm working, I'm doing the things, and it takes a long time. And so that's something that we don't always see about Europe. And I think that's something that we have to highlight, but also to continue looking to how we can support younger people who are starting off. I want to turn over to Mia. Can you talk about, compared to other regions, what is the characteristics that are different in Europe? What separates the youth workforce in Europe as opposed to any other region in the world? And what also makes this job market different? Are the opportunities? What can you say? From your perspective?
Thanks. I'm actually going to be really brief because I know you all listened very attentively to Sara, and she spoke about the NEET rates being lower in Europe, education typically being higher, and also that expectation and a little bit of a shift in terms of whether an academic exam is going to get you to that good job. So let me more just say that it's I'm not used to actually speaking to European youth. I'm used to speaking to youth in countries where I have served, and it's so much harder. I remember when I spoke to young people, probably a similar age group as most of them under 30, very few people over 30, at Forbay College in Sierra Leone. Forbay College used to be where many people in West Africa studied. It was an education institution which was very well known, very respected. Then there's a civil war and things fall apart. And you're facing this group of young people who are going to get out with an education which is not going to be trusted necessarily, which with curricula which are not necessarily updated, with new concepts, whatever skills area you're looking at, which is likely going to be less than optimal, right? Now, what do you say? And then enormous unemployment, very much more of a society where age is looked at very differently, right? And where young is also a label of you haven't been able to move out of your parents' home, and you haven't been able to start your family and have kids. So I think it's important to keep in mind that if you study in Europe, and if you get your first experience in Geneva, you're still part of a very privileged group of people. And that's something we shouldn't forget. And I think it's important to since you have had these discussions and in other parts of the world as well, to appreciate what we have and build on that, and keep in mind that youth unemployment in many parts of the world is a much, much more challenging question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we're going to go and head over to the audience. We wanted to ask you, between the generations, which period offers better upward mobility? So like this ability for opportunities to grow in your careers, to achieving a higher standard of a living than one of your parents for young people. Let's see what you responded. Gabriele, if you can show the answers. Okay, so a lot more people think than earlier on. So the divide, okay, so very few people think that they have better opportunities. I think, Sarah, you're surprised by this, right?
It's what we saw. It's what we saw. In
Yeah,
the other one.
exactly.
We're the lucky ones. Gen Xers are left here somehow.
Yeah, and I think it's also the side of contract work being so prevalent. So when we think about jobs, we don't necessarily think, oh, are they giving me opportunities? I'll just move. I'll change. So maybe that's also the conception that's also different from young people. Because as I said, I just go for a different project. I don't work with them anymore. If they're not paying me enough, that's that side of contract, which that's an evolution. That might be a reason why to that difference. So we definitely look up to you and look like, oh, we wish we had it just the same, but we'll see what we'll say in a few years when Gen Alpha comes, and maybe this might continue. Perfect. And we're going to have a question for all of our speakers. And this is the policy side of what can governments and international organizations and like the ILO, what can they be doing to support youth in their transition, to make it smoother, to not maybe let us, I think, as you said, stressful and anxious driven a process. What do you think that the international organizations and governments can be doing to help that? And again, we'll put the question up online for everyone to open up that conversation, but I would love to hand over to the speakers.
I have kind of one point on this. I think I really admire the Swiss system of apprentissage that's here, which is this vocational training that you have, and where you are allowed to have internships at 16, which is the time where you should be having internships on the kind of jobs that you want to have. I think once you're like 25, it makes no sense to be at an unpaid internship. But when you're 16, you can discover more things, figure out if this is what you want to do, and also change around without too much of an impact on your career. So I think that is a really good system, which could be adopted in other countries. But I will say that the Swiss system and the systems that I've had contact with in either Spain or Belgium, where I've done freelancing, are just not adapted to freelancing at all. There is no concept of freelancing here. You're either an employee with a steady salary with your little pay sheet, or you're an employer. There's this idea of freelancing is so foreign. So I think whether it's filling out taxes, whether it's getting paid as a freelancer, that kind of thing, it's a huge uphill battle. that is just not taken into account. And I think we need to figure that out before the Uberization goes the other way and all freelancers are sucked in through a platform which basically takes 20% of your income and doesn't really do anything else for you. So yeah, the other side of Uberization.
Yeah.
So first, from an ILO perspective, I think it's absolutely key to help countries link three things. One is understanding of how labor markets are changing, understanding where the emerging sectors are and what are the skills that are going to be needed, and then lining up the skills programs and the employment services to link this. Because what's more frustrating than spending years and years getting an education which is no longer in demand on the labor market? I think the second thing is, but that's a little bit what you said, Michelle. I think it's important to have programs that help young people during the transition and during search periods. So in other words, making sure that there's support to keep young people active, so that when you have either a breaking contract or you are looking for a job and writing those numerous applications, you can either have whatever it is, whether it's online courses, whether it's internships, whether it's different groups, but you can really stay active during that period. In terms of new sectors and the fact that we don't really know what the future jobs are going to look like, I think it's important to provide support both to education teachers and those who provide career advice to really help see beyond what you know, because the jobs are going to change quite dramatically. Young people likely will need to get into jobs that their parents didn't do. And not necessarily anybody in the family did. How do you envision those jobs, whether you're going to be the first one in the generation who, say, goes back to get a vocational training rather than an academic exam, or you're the first one who's going to move abroad, or you're the first one. And then it's important to help young people link up with people who have successfully managed those transitions and gotten into new fields. But just to conclude, the changes are likely to be dramatic. The green transition, the demographic transition, the digitization, of course, is going to impact on the world of work a lot. And we need to help the institutions to manage that change and then help young people to anticipate and fit in.
Very true. Davide, over to you.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think with everything that you've said from an institutional point of view, of course, standards and regulations for decent growth to advance decent job opportunities. More alignment also with the educational system, so that, as you were saying, through vocational training or mentorship programs or apprentissage between the different educational institutions or not, but also their institutions, for instance, the UN, and not only, they must create spaces for also young people to share what their ideal scenario jobs are, what their wishes are. Spaces also like this, and I thank you for hosting such space, because there's a sensing exercise that must be there in order for new job opportunities to really reflect and mirror the necessities and needs of current, but also especially future generations. Because at the end of the day, if that lacks, we will have labor force that is not satisfied or doesn't find their own needs satisfied through the job opportunities, and therefore less productivity. And it's a vicious cycle. So spaces for learning and understanding and sensing of youth priorities and needs. I think that's it.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And let's go to see what you all think, the audience. What were obstacles that you faced to find decent work? Okay, so we have some responses already. Instability of contracts, we've talked about them. The race to the bottom, and that's the conversation about decent work, right? It's what kind of work are we looking for? Because I don't want to have a job, as we said, that's no longer interesting. Any comments from the speakers about what we're seeing here?
Absolutely. I have a comment on the bureaucracy being absolutely insane, and I agree. I do. Yes, I think employing somebody is very hard. Having seen it from this side, I'm sure other people know as well. But at the same time, also starting a business, like, it's wild. Because my parents, so I grew up in Mexico. My mom's Swiss, my dad's Mexican. And there's no way they can help. I feel like these are the people you would reach out to start a business. And there's no way they can help me because they don't know the Swiss system. And there's no way to no information that's out there on how to do it. So
Can we scroll down on some of the answers and maybe if you have any
Do you-
comments on Davide, do you have any comments on some of these responses that you're seeing?
Yeah, so on many different ones, but maybe I'll pick the corruption. I wouldn't say, so I'm not going into the nitty-gritty of corruption, but related to that, a lot of positions that are publicly available but privately already assigned, or sort of this person, know this person, so you put down there, and then there's the question of meritocracy there, or there's the question of why am I even doing this for? Why am I even? I've been taught certain things at school, but then there's a networking bit that I really miss, and then I see people advancing for personal connections. I get this frustration, and it's not the same as corruption, but it made me think of that, and I think it's something that, at least in my opinions, personal experience, also among my peers, I think it's something that it's there, and it's a big elephant in the room, and it's something that it's been like that since dawn of time. But nowadays, with the even higher competitions, it's really, sometimes it's even presented as the only way, which I don't believe so. I really don't believe so, but most of the time it is. So yeah, it speaks a lot, I think, to me, but I can agree with the majority of what's there.
I think sadly, very few of these things are new. And I think sadly, there's not a single generation alive that hasn't experienced this. So I think it's important to put a sharper focus on what is new and what are some of the new clouds on the horizon in terms of recruitment practices, which serves no one and certainly doesn't serve people who are entering into the labor market. AI was seen as something that's going to decrease the biases in recruitment processes, has possibly done the opposite. Practices, I think you mentioned, Davide, of fake recruitment processes where employers just want to see what's out there without a real intention of actually recruiting. I think we need to, so a lot of this is known to your grandparents, it's known to me, it's known to everybody. And I think we need to also put a sharper focus on some of these new phenomena, which of course, again, hits everybody, but hits in particular the ones who are entering the labor market.
Absolutely. Wonderful. And so now we're opening up our Q&A time. So I'm going to encourage everyone. Perfect. We have everyone in the audience. We're going to start over here, the in-person audience, and also everyone online. Please use the Q&A box to submit your questions. We have colleagues who are looking at them and will be able to bring them towards us. Haley, if I could ask you just to take that mic and just to give it to. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Natalia Bayurova, Geneva Culture First chapter lead. Culture First is the biggest global organization of change agents co-creating a better world of work. And my question is about workplace culture. And we hear so much about the younger generation carrying the burden of challenging even the most mainstream things that we believe, even those that are believed to be very advanced and very, woke even. And they challenge even things like, why do I have to bring my whole self to work? Why do I have to bring my best self to work? So things like that. And I'm just curious, and this is maybe for everyone and the wonderful facilitator as well, what are your experiences navigating that shift? Because any change, especially when it comes to culture, comes at a cost. And especially the younger representatives, I'm very curious about your own observations about that happening where you are. Thank you.
Perfect. Let's take a few. You have a question over here? No? Anyone else has a question in the room? Oh, yep, over here. Thank you.
Thanks so much. This is maybe a question for Gen Z, but I guess for Gen X as well. One of the tropes is about meaning at work. And I think a few of you spoke about obviously doing that through a UN lens, but that's, I think, a niche that many would say that's a niche case. The question is, I wonder if you could dig into that and whether there are abilities that I suppose more regular jobs can create meaning at work for the way that you define it, or whether that is exclusively, it's got to be tied to causes of social progress or specific causes you're passionate about.
So any other questions? We might just, one over here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Liana Melchenko, Isaka Foundation. One question that I wanted to ask was related to that data point about the differences between male and female young employment and unemployment. And I wonder what needs to be done today so that we don't face the problems of basically what we are seeing now in terms of lack of female representation, lack of diversity and inclusion in higher ranking, basically higher level jobs or boards or other leadership of companies. What needs to be done today for this?
Wonderful. So let's give it over to our lovely. Oh, there's another one question. Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. I have a quick question. What are your comments on the trend of infinite growth and the impacts on employees? And then the usage of, let's say, more working hours with less employees and then maybe the replacement of AI, but like the trend of infinite growth and just chasing that. Thank you.
Big questions over here. So I'm gonna return. Which one would you like to take, Michelle?
I think those two questions about the meaning of work that you do every day and also the company culture has a lot to do one with the other. Because to me, like we said, the UN lens was never my thing. I was never here to that wasn't my expectation from the beginning. What I think is if you're going to show up to work every day, it's good to have a good company culture. It's good to the people that you're with. And that is the base level for me. Obviously, you don't want to be doing anything evil, but that's basic things. But I think they both have to do a lot with each other. And I think a lot of times when, especially NGOs I've worked with and that kind of thing, where there's this kind of message that you're doing good and therefore everything else is allowed. So they can disrespect you, they can do anything bad because we're doing good and it's for the good of whoever, whatever. And so I think company culture is a lot more important than the actual message of what you're doing at the end of the day with the enterprise. I don't remember the other questions, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Great questions. Just two quick comments. The first one in terms of, are we putting too much expectation on the younger generation to fix workplace issues, toxic working environments? I would say we probably are. And I think we owe a lot to the younger generation for being so much better than I was, than many of my colleagues were in setting boundaries. Basic, not insane boundaries. Not some of the Insta jokes about you guys, but more just common sense boundaries, which we didn't, and certainly our grandparents' generation didn't do. You bite your teeth and you get on with it, and that's not good, right? So I think there's that. What I hope is happening is that we're moving towards much more awareness about the fact that with the demographic shifts, we're going to have intergenerational workplaces. And those intergenerational workplaces have to function for 3, 4, 5 generations working side to side who come from very different experiences in terms of expectations, in terms of feedback culture, in terms of hierarchies, in terms of flexible work arrangements. And it has to work for everybody. And I think that's really where a lot of focus needs to be put. Just to agree with you, it doesn't, for many people, it's about what you're part of. It's that feeling of being part of a team. And that doesn't have to be the UN. And the UN work culture is not always something that we can be across the board proud of. And you're right, whether it's the aid culture, the UN culture, the humanitarian community, and sometimes the doing good label covers up for improvements in the working environment that's needed, be that just workplace issues or listening to young people, creating inclusive spaces. So it really is a company culture that makes everybody in the workplace feel that they're part of, they belong, and they contribute, and their contribution is appreciated. In terms of the difference between men and women on some of the unemployment figures, I think Sara would be the best one to speak to the statistic.
Thank you. No, I agree on On your point on too much burden for you on youth, absolutely yes. I think within the work, I do a lot of like youth engagement in my work, and that's a bit of the issue there, the hot potato there that has been thrown from generation into generation under logos and slogans of you are the agents of change. It's a hot potato, right? Because is it really agency or is just passing the baton to the next one? Because the older generations couldn't solve problems that even the ones that they created, right? So there is a thin line between actual agency and just hot potato throwing. From the changing culture, especially from the intergenerational point of view, a lot of time within, I can speak about my work, working in an institution like the UN, which is old, big institution, a lot of like youth voices and youth fuel. Most of the times it's lacking or it's contrasting what's been promoted as traditional sort of approaches. But, and I think it was said before, if we look at the very core of our being, I don't want to sound too meta, but we all share the same things, right? We want to belong. We want to be appreciated and loved. We want safety. And I want it as a 28-year-old. My mom wants it as a 60-year-old. My grandma wants it as a 93-year-old. So I think tapping into that when we feel that there is a sort of clash within cultures, intergenerations, and not only, I think tapping into the sort of like the humanity that we share, I think that's a good way to advance also different approaches. Last but not least, on the meaning within UN, but also beyond the UN, I think, first of all, I think it has to be a reflection of that you do within yourself and what is your own sphere of influence. And second, where do you think change comes from, right? Because I see, for instance, with the 2030 agenda, SDGs been criticized, oh, it's not working, it's not a change doesn't start from the UN. What's the scale where change comes from, in your opinion? Change can come from the way that you treat your colleague, the one that you share your desk with, in a corporate job or in a UN job or in an NGO job, but whatever. So different acts of kindness that you do or things like that. So like, how can you advance this social purpose within your own scale of influence? And I think that once you realize that change is actually happening in the way that I say hi to someone that sits next to me, rather than in the way that an SDG target 16.3 is applied to in whatever, I think that's more manageable approach and an approach that can really give you agency and hope rather than a sense of withdrawal and overwhelmness.
Thank you. No, Sara, do you want to come up and answer our question? Thank you.
Don't make me follow Davide. That was so good and so beautiful. And yes, but this story of women and the disadvantages that young women, it's just an added burden that we face, right? We have this thing that says we might want to have children someday. I think in Europe, in the context where I grew up, I'm North American, so there is more or less an even playing ground up until a certain point. I felt as empowered as any young man that I'm going to school with. And then I get married and have children. And suddenly I realized, heck, this is really hard. It's really hard for me to advance in the workplace. So it's more about the career advancement and the sacrifices we make as women. And of course, why young women don't advance as much as young men is because sometimes we'll sacrifice our career goals at the moment when we decide we want to have a child, and then it's harder to come back. So this is why, but we're talking about young people, why youth unemployment of young women is higher. I think, yeah, family considerations are an important point. And also the type of jobs that young women want to do and put themselves out for. And discrimination is still very much a part of our recruitment practices, even if we're doing better than we did 50 years ago. Thanks.
Thank you, Sara. I would love to take some online questions, actually. We have a colleague, Joanna, who's been looking through. And Haley, if we could just give her the mic. Joanna's right over there. And she'll extract a few questions from our online audience.
So we don't have many. There were a lot of questions about the reports and where they can find information about the episodes across the regions, which is very nice. But I can share one about the core elements of success to get youth into industries like green economy and AI. And then at the beginning, there was a question about, is the world worse in the 2020s than in the 1980s? They went even further. But I guess it's like maybe a question to help us close the discussion today about what do we feel it's better, worse for those under 25 in the developed countries. These were the
Thank
two.
you. No easy questions here. But I think also while you're answering these questions, you can also think about like your closing remarks and thoughts as well for this discussion. As we said, this is such a crucial conversation that we have to have, not just here, which is fantastic that we have, but we bring these conversations into our workplaces and in everywhere we go, because we can change things, but it just takes that level of getting into the gritty stuff, getting into some of the changes that we need to make. So, Michelle, over to you.
I'll try. So I couldn't tell you if the world was better in 1980 because I wasn't there. But I do think there is this tendency of also romanticizing the past that happens a lot to Gen Z as well, of saying, oh, but like back then it was so much better because kids were on bikes in the streets and whatever. It's not necessarily true. I think a lot of things have advanced. I think I am delighted to be able to work on a computer and do these different things through the tools that I have that are available to me online. Like I learned all of the things that I do at my job right now, not through university or anything like that. I went on YouTube and I looked up tutorials. I think that is something that's accessible to us now and that we have to remember. The internet is great. Basically, that's my point. And yeah, I think it's important to see how far we've come. I think as humans with innovation, we've come very far. I think the system has to follow along. So I think it's important to systems that hire us try to understand how people learn. So basically certificates that are not necessarily university certificates. And also that different governments are also able to, like I said, empower people to be their own boss, to be their own freelancer. I sound like an MLM marketer. No, but to be able to be paid and to have a fair wage, even though you are freelancing, for instance. Oh, sorry.
Davide?
I share the same, so I wasn't there, so I cannot tell if past was better. I don't think so, though. I think in terms of opportunities, we have way more opportunities nowadays, being with the internet. The internet is there, but also like from concepts like we talked about before, like mental health, or I don't know, just even like freedoms of expression, of sexuality, religion, identity, and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of more. There's way more discourses nowadays than in the past. So we managed to overcome, to at least talk about many taboos, overcome them not yet. So I think this narrative of hope and has to be put forward. The fact acknowledging the more opportunities nowadays than ever before, that must lead to a proactive, a constructive hope narrative that can be especially useful, and it's so much needed for young people nowadays that are so often feeling this sense of withdrawal and really overwhelmed by so many things that are happening nowadays and so fast. You spoke about infinite growth before. Everything's happening so fast. And where am I looking at? What there's always a cooler job. There's always a cooler friend. There's always a cooler partner. There's always so many things are there that we need to go back, sit down, thinking that the things are going well. They're going better than they were before. So this has to give us hope. This has to give us balance and saying, okay, I'm entering into my workspace and I'm trying to bring this optimism, hope, and drive that I think it's also very inspirational. It's a very big inspirational factor from an intergenerational discourse as well. Yeah, I'll stop here.
This is the last comment. Okay, so I think the scary thing is it's easy to think that the world now, we are at an inflection point in history, in human history. There's more conflicts, intersecting conflicts, bigger numbers, longer displacement. The climate crisis obviously is causing a lot of angst across generations, right? It's not only young people, right? And we are looking at levels of polarization, which is further exacerbated by social media. So it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that things are worse. But that's not a good place to be. And I think that's really what we need to work at on pretty much a daily basis. I think we have a lot of thinking alike when it comes to hope. Hope is a practice. There's no one who wakes up every morning and feels hopeful. So it's really a question of intentionally staying hopeful and intentionally seeing things around you and in people and in those small acts of kindness that's going to keep you hopeful, because otherwise it's easy to fall into despair. And what I think we should not forget is in all these intergenerational conversations and all those words about Gen Zs and Gen X and what have you, we're all human. And I don't think the fundamentals of being human has changed dramatically across generations. And that's the power we have to tap into, and that's what we need to tap into. My two last words in terms of the career discussion is, and this is also where I actually think that Gen Zers are better than we were when we entered the labor market. It's incredibly important to know yourself. Know your strengths, know your skills, know your competencies, know how to strengthen those, but keeping in mind that those you can alter, but you can't really alter who you are as a person. So you really need to know who you are as a person to know what is the job that's going to make you feel fulfilled, that's going to give you a sense of purpose, where you really can contribute. And I think that knowing yourself is absolutely critical and should be part of any career advice and any career journey, including then helping people do a little bit more long-term planning. In today's world, if you want to have family and kids, you probably need to start think about it before you're 35. At some point, you will be the sandwich generation. Your mother is now, aging parents, young kids. Where do you want to be? In what country? On what continent? What do you need to earn to be able to manage that stage in life? Which is a stage when a lot of women actually leave their jobs because the job doesn't allow them to carry those dual responsibilities. And it's a little bit better now, but it used to be a big point of women leaving their career. And then the last point is, from my side, there's no shortcuts to the dream job. It's a long journey and you got to put in quite a bit of work. But if you have a vision for what your journey is and what you want it to look like, it will, of course, help to get you there.
Thank you so much. Can we give the speakers a hand of applause for well done? And I would also like to thank our audience for all your interaction online, and a specific thanks to the ILO team, Youth Foresight, and the TASC team who made this happen. Really grateful for all of you and all the support. If we just go to the next slide, there, we want to invite you to take a picture of the QR code that's going to appear on the screen. And if you have, take a few minutes to fill in the youth for the youth employment barometer. There we go. And just to be part of this, so we really encourage you just to take a little time. Here in person, we have a networking time available to us, so we can continue some of these conversations with each other. We just really want to thank everyone online for staying on and interacting. It was a fantastic session. We are going to have another talk in the series, our last one coming up in the beginning of the year, and that one will be focused on Latin America. So we're looking forward to continuing this conversation, and we will be sharing the recordings after this. So please stay in touch and keep watching this space. Thank you all so much.